The legend of Elvis Presley has always carried both brilliance and mystery. To the world, he was the electrifying performer who reshaped music and lived like a king. But behind the curtain, Elvis surrounded himself with a close circle of men, protectors who guarded him not only from adoring fans, but at times from his own struggles. Now, one of those men has come forward with revelations that challenge the image we thought we knew. For years, rumors swirled about Elvis's private life, his restless nights, unusual habits, and the crushing weight of fame. Still, no one from his inner circle ever spoke openly, until now. For the first time, one of his most trusted bodyguards shares the hidden truth, and it forever changes the story of Elvis Presley. Elvis Presley's dangerous circle of loyalty. Being one of Elvis Presley's bodyguards wasn't just a job, it was a daily gamble with fear. Elvis lived under a constant shadow of threats, always worried about being assassinated, and his men were the ones expected to stand between him and danger. Their loyalty ran so deep that they were willing to take a bullet for him. Still, when some of them eventually walked away, it wasn't because they stopped caring. It was because the pay simply didn't match the risks of dying on the job. In 1972, that fear turned chillingly real when word spread that a woman in the audience might try to shoot Elvis. His bodyguards reacted instantly. Sonny West and Red West positioned themselves in front of the stage, forming a human shield while Elvis edged toward the back, angling himself sideways to make a smaller target. Both men later admitted they were terrified, expecting at any moment to hear the crack of a gun and feel the impact of a bullet. Red confessed that in those tense seconds, all he could think about was his wife and children. At the time, Elvis was paying his bodyguards around $425 a week, well above the national average. But the men still admitted it felt foolish to risk their lives for that amount. And yet, they all agreed the bond was more than a paycheck. As Dave Hebler explained, if anyone had tried to hurt Elvis, they would have had to go through his bodyguards first. Gratitude from Elvis didn't come in the form of words. Instead, he gave extravagant gifts, often without warning. For Red and Sonny, though, those gestures didn't replace the acknowledgement they wanted. They felt Elvis flaunted their loyalty, bragging to others about their willingness to take knives or bullets for him, without ever truly thanking them. Priscilla Presley later admitted the salaries were modest, usually around $250 a week, but she believed Elvis made up for it with generosity. According to her, if any of the men were ever strapped for cash, they could ask Elvis for help, whether it was a down payment on a house or rent money. He would hand over thousands without hesitation, rarely asking to be repaid. It was his way of showing loyalty in return, even if words of thanks seldom followed. The bodyguard who questioned everything. Right after Elvis Presley was pronounced dead at a Memphis hospital, his father, Vernon, was consumed with grief. In his desperation, he turned to his son's trusted bodyguard, Richard Grobb, and gave him a task that would haunt him for years: find out how Elvis really died. Grobb, a former policeman from Toledo, began digging, interviewing dozens of people close to the singer. What he claims to have uncovered was explosive. According to him, it was Elvis's girlfriend, Ginger Alden, who discovered the star collapsed on the bathroom floor. But instead of calling for help immediately, Grobb alleges she first contacted a tabloid. He insists nearly an hour passed before an ambulance was summoned. By then, Elvis's body was already cold, and Grobb says he still cannot be sure whether the singer had been alive when Alden first found him. Ginger Alden has always fiercely denied these accusations, dismissing them as cruel lies and pointing out several factual errors in Grobb's own accounts. Yet, the claims have never truly gone away. They continue to divide fans, spark debates, and fuel conspiracy theories about the death of one of America's most iconic entertainers. For decades, the official story has centered on Elvis's dependence on prescription drugs, narcotics, amphetamines, and sedatives that had plagued him for years. when his body was discovered at Graceland on August 16, 1977. Toxicology reports revealed 11 different drugs in his system, 4 of them dangerously incompatible. Still, Grob's allegations opened a new layer of suspicion over a death already surrounded by mystery. To this day, the autopsy report remains sealed, and the official cause of death is recorded only as heart failure. Fans and experts alike continue to ask the same question: could Elvis Presley have been saved? At the heart of this controversy stands Richard Grob himself, a tall, outspoken figure who graduated from Devilbiss High School in Toledo. To some, he is nothing more than a man chasing attention and profit, a seller of questionable memorabilia whose claims can't be trusted. To others, he represents one of the last loyal voices still searching for the truth about Elvis. His self-published book, The Elvis Conspiracy, released in 1996, made him a regular speaker at Elvis conventions, where fans flock to hear his perspective, no matter how controversial. Even a quarter of a century after his passing, Elvis Presley remains larger than life. He was the boy from Tupelo who rose from nothing to become one of the greatest cultural figures the world has ever seen. With more than 1 billion records sold worldwide, his influence eclipses even the Beatles. Decades after his death, a remixed version of his 1968 track A Little Less Conversation soared to #1 in England, cementing his status as a timeless force in music. Darwin Lamb, publisher of Elvis International Forum, once noted that Presley gave American music an identity it had never known before, sparking a revolution that predated the Beatles. Friends remembered him with awe. Joe Esposito, one of his closest companions, once said that meeting Elvis changed a person forever. For Richard Grob, those words rang especially true. Grob grew up in the heart of America, the son of an army officer. Born in Sandusky, he spent 3 years in Germany before his parents settled in Toledo in 1949. While Elvis Presley was being raised in Memphis, Richard Grob's childhood unfolded in the shadow of Willys Park, where workers tested Jeeps fresh off the assembly line. Life changed abruptly 2 days after his 12th birthday. His father, Richard, was killed by mortar fire in Korea, leaving young Grob without the guidance he longed for. Still, his life followed a strict, almost military rhythm. High school yearbooks from Devilbiss listed him in just 2 roles: hall guard and cafeteria guard. In 1956, during his junior year, Elvis Presley performed at the Toledo Sports Arena. Though teenagers everywhere were rushing to see the rising star, Grob skipped both shows. He later admitted that Elvis's early music didn't appeal to him. After graduating, Grob was accepted into the Air Force Academy as the son of a fallen veteran, but he lasted only 8 months before dropping out. Critics would later point to that short stint, but it didn't stop him from carving out his own path. Returning to Toledo, he joined the police force in 1962. Within 2 years, he earned a commendation for calmly arresting 3 disruptive teenagers at a crowded dance, avoiding chaos among the 300 others packed into Highland Park. That skill in keeping crowds under control would eventually lead him to a much bigger stage. In 1965, seeking warmer weather for his young family, Grob moved to California and joined the Palm Springs Police Department. 2 years later, he was sent on what seemed like a routine assignment: keep fans away from a private home where Elvis and Priscilla Presley were honeymooning. On a scorching afternoon in May, Grob was sitting in his patrol car when a man strolled up with a glass of lemonade and asked if he could sit for a while. To his surprise, it was Elvis himself. The two talked for an hour, bonding over Grob's police work, something Elvis had always found fascinating. That chance meeting soon grew into a friendship. Grob invited Elvis to the police shooting range, and not long after, Elvis offered him a job. Grob accepted, first part-time, stepping into the tight inner circle of the king of rock and roll. But Grob entered at a turbulent time. By the late 1960s, Elvis's life was shifting. Behind the spotlight, he was fighting a hidden battle with prescription drugs. By 1970, sedatives, painkillers, and marital troubles were beginning to dominate his life. His doctor, George Nicopolis, was never far away, supplying thousands of pills each year, from common sedatives to heavy painkillers like Dilaudid and Demerol. Grob and others grew concerned. At times, they replaced Elvis's medications with harmless placebos, convinced that much of his dependency was psychological. Even so, Grob avoided framing it as abuse, insisting years later that Elvis was more mentally attached to the drugs than physically dependent. His version of events often clashed with those of others in the singer's circle, such as cousin Billy Smith, who recalled Elvis sinking into isolation, days spent locked in his room, unwashed and depressed, resembling the reclusive Howard Hughes. Grob preferred to remember the lighter side. He spoke of Elvis laughing, joking, and clowning for cameras at his second wedding in 1970. Still, there were darker moments. The security team had to remain vigilant when Elvis fired guns at furniture or television sets. His fame brought enormous earnings, $130,000 a concert. But between 1973 and 1976, several shows in Las Vegas and Lake Tahoe had to be canceled, some directly linked to drug-related issues. By 1976, the consequences were undeniable. Elvis was gaining weight, canceling more shows, and spending time in hospitals. After one performance in Las Vegas that December, journalist Bill Burke left the showroom shaken, writing that Elvis looked so unprepared and frail that one had to wonder how much longer he could possibly go on. On August 16, 1977, Elvis Presley was preparing for a 10-city concert tour scheduled to begin the very next day. In the early hours of the morning, he sat down with his head of security, Richard Grob, to go over last-minute details. They spoke on and off until about 5:30 a.m., with Elvis even taking a break to play racquetball. Grob would later recall that Elvis seemed upbeat and happy. But behind the scenes, the singer's long struggle with prescription drugs was still very much a reality. Around 4 a.m., his stepbrother, Rick Stanley, delivered 6 Dilaudid tablets along with other powerful packs of painkillers and sedatives. By 5:30 a.m., Elvis went to his bedroom with his 21-year-old girlfriend, Ginger Alden. Unable to sleep, he asked for more medication at 8 a.m., and about half an hour later, his Aunt Delta Mae brought him 3 additional sedatives. The next 5 hours would prove to be the most critical of his life. According to Ginger, Elvis eventually went into his large bathroom to read since he still couldn't rest. When she awoke around 2 p.m., he wasn't beside her. After phoning her mother and a friend, Ginger knocked on the bathroom door at 2:20 p.m., and when there was no answer, went inside. Elvis was lying on the floor in a fetal position, his face pressed into the thick carpet, his skin slightly discolored. She called downstairs for help, and within minutes, several people, including his aide Joe Esposito, rushed in. Esposito later said he knew instantly that Elvis was gone. The news devastated Vernon Presley. Struggling to accept that his son was dead at just 42, he asked Grob to investigate. As a former police officer, Grob began interviewing those present at Graceland. What he claimed to uncover would later spark decades of controversy. According to Grob, Ginger Alden's timeline did not add up. He alleged that she woke at 1:30 p.m. after hearing a thump, discovered Elvis in the bathroom, but instead of immediately calling for help, she first phoned her mother and then contacted the National Enquirer. Maids at Graceland backed part of this version, saying they heard a loud noise around 1:30 and saw the phone bank downstairs light up with a call from Elvis's room at that exact time. Grob wrote that Ginger didn't summon help until nearly 50 minutes later. What followed only added fuel to suspicion. Grob claimed that just as the ambulance pulled away from Graceland, Ginger phoned the tabloid again to announce Elvis's death. He also noted that when she finally appeared downstairs, She was fully dressed, showed no emotion, and had no visible tears. According to Grob, she and her mother had even been negotiating with the National Enquirer at the time, though the Alden family denied these accusations. The fallout from Grob's book was explosive. Elvis fans flooded newspapers and fan clubs with angry letters, accusing Ginger of betrayal. She, however, strongly denied the claims, calling them malicious fabrications. In interviews, she insisted she loved Elvis deeply and had never called any publication before his death. She did acknowledge selling a story to the Enquirer afterward for $35,000, but maintained that was the extent of her involvement. Still, Grob pointed to an interview with Jim Kirk, a former freelance reporter for the Enquirer, who claimed the first call from Graceland came around 1:30 p.m. from a woman who sounded like Ginger. Kirk had met her before, though she never gave her name during the call. Another woman tied to an Enquirer reporter later told Grob she also believed Ginger had contacted the tabloid, but asked to remain anonymous. In his final assessment, Grob suggested that Elvis might have survived if help had come sooner. Carpet fibers were reportedly found in his nose, raising the possibility he was still breathing for a time after collapsing. But these claims could never be proven. The Presley family, determined to keep some details private, sealed the 44-page autopsy report, leaving unanswered questions about the king's final hours. Now, Ginger Alden and her family have always maintained that Elvis planned to announce their engagement at the end of his 10-city tour. He had even given her an 11-carat diamond, taken straight from one of his own rings. Yet others close to Elvis, including his longtime friend Charlie Hodge and former bodyguard Dick Grob, claimed the opposite, that Elvis had actually been preparing to end the relationship. The debate only deepened with reports about a mysterious phone call from Graceland on the morning of Elvis's death. A Tennessee journalist who covered the story insisted that the tip to the National Enquirer came from a man's voice, not a woman's. Grob remained firm that his sources were solid, and he believed the evidence could always be investigated and verified. In 1996, before Grob's book was released, he was confronted near Graceland by Ginger's mother, Jo Alden. At over 80 years old, she wagged her finger at him and accused him of being unfair to her daughter, insisting Ginger had only loved Elvis and had never tried to harm him. When Grob finally published The Elvis Conspiracy, the 665-page book immediately divided fans. Many objected to its portrayal of Ginger as distant or unfeeling toward Elvis, while others were unsettled by questions about Grob's own credibility. His military record came under particular scrutiny. In his autobiography, Grob had compared himself to his decorated father, claiming to have received a Silver Star and Purple Heart. Official records, however, revealed otherwise. He had left the Air Force Academy in 1959 before finishing his first year, later serving in the reserves until 1964 as an airman second class. No combat service, no medals. Yet, the biography on his book jacket described him as an officer. When asked, Grob dismissed the issue, saying he had resolved those misconceptions years earlier and refused to elaborate. Controversy followed him elsewhere. In 1995, Grob attempted to auction what he claimed was a rare, unreleased Elvis recording personally gifted to him, signed with the words, "To Dick." The minimum bid was set at $50,000. RCA, co-owner of Elvis's catalog, quickly declared the voice was not Elvis's, and the record failed to sell. Later disputes over ownership only made matters more tangled, with a German businessman claiming to have bought the rights for $15,000, while Grob insisted the deal was temporary. That same auction featured another questionable item, a musical illustration allegedly signed by Elvis. Bidding ended before it began when experts pointed out the print had been made years after Elvis's death. Joe Esposito, one of Elvis's closest friends, was present and flatly called the signature a fake. Grob said he had been misled by a California dealer, had received his money back, and felt it was unfair to continually defend himself against accusations of fraud. Through it all, Grob believed much of the hostility came from supporters of Ginger Alden. He complained of anonymous emails directed at him and his family, insisting that he had not yet even begun to push back against his critics. After leaving Graceland in 1979, he worked as a sales consultant while also joining the Elvis lecture circuit. Now semi-retired, he continued to insist he had always been loyal to Elvis's memory. Some supporters defended him, arguing that unlike others in Elvis's circle, Grob had never cashed in by revealing deeply personal stories. But the core claims from his investigation remained unproven. As Charlie Hodge once said, only two people would ever know the truth about Elvis's final intentions: Ginger Alden and God, the bodyguard who broke Elvis's heart. From the very beginning, Robert Gene "Red" West was right there alongside Elvis Presley. He wasn't just another face in the entourage, he was one of the very first members of the tight-knit circle that would later be called the Memphis Mafia. On the surface, his roles seemed simple: driver, bodyguard, companion. But what Elvis really wanted was company, someone he trusted to be by his side, and Red filled that space perfectly. As Elvis's career exploded, Red found himself doing a little bit of everything, sometimes practical, sometimes creative, while also building his own side careers in acting, stunt work, and songwriting. But their friendship was never without tension. Red had a short fuse, a violent streak, and a constant clash with Elvis's father, Vernon. More than once, tempers flared, and Red either stormed off or got himself fired. Yet somehow, he always found his way back. Loyalty bound them together, even when loyalty wasn't easy. In the end, though, their bond unraveled as Elvis's health declined, leaving behind words and actions on both sides that could never be undone. Their story began long before fame. Back in high school, Red was a football star, while Elvis stood out for very different reasons. Elvis seemed lonely, out of place, and often mocked for his flashy style, wearing scarves tied like ascots, walking the halls like a Hollywood actor. Red noticed, and one day, when a group of boys cornered Elvis in the bathroom and threatened to cut his hair, Red stepped in. That act of protection made a lasting impression. A few years later, after Elvis released his first record, he came back around to ask Red if he wanted to join him. Red didn't hesitate. From that moment on, their lives were linked. As Elvis's fame grew, so did his inner circle, which soon included his cousin Gene and Red's cousin Sonny. Elvis loved surrounding himself with friends, but two people weren't so thrilled about it: his frugal father, Vernon, and his ever-controlling manager, Colonel Tom Parker. By 1956, Elvis was a superstar, and while fans adored him, the Colonel often blamed his mishaps on the people around him. When the group showed up late to a venue, even though Elvis himself was responsible, Parker lashed out at Red with a fury that became all too familiar. That same year, Red's clashes with Vernon boiled over. Just before Elvis left to film Love Me Tender, Red got into a fight, and Vernon made it clear he wanted him gone. Elvis stayed quiet, and the silence stung. Red walked away, joining the Marines. Their paths didn't cross again until over a year later, when they reconnected in Hollywood during the filming of King Creole. Soon after, Red followed Elvis to Germany for his military service, and their bond reignited. When Elvis was discharged in 1960, he returned to Los Angeles with new friends, including fellow Army buddy Charlie Hodge, a musician in his own right. Red was already building a career in Hollywood as a stuntman on the TV series The Rebel, but he quickly found himself back in Elvis's orbit, working on GI Blues. From then on, he appeared in almost all of Elvis's films, sometimes as a stunt double, sometimes as an actor. His ambitions expanded further into songwriting. Taught to play guitar by Elvis's first guitarist, Scotty Moore, Red soon linked up with Memphis-born songwriters Dorsey and Johnny Burnett. the same duo behind Ricky Nelson's hits. Working with them gave Red the push he needed to start writing for Elvis himself. By the mid-1960s, though, Elvis was restless. The movies all felt the same, the studio work was flat, and he leaned on Red more than ever. In June 1966, Elvis even skipped a recording session entirely, sending Red to sing the reference vocals for him. A few months later, when it came time to choose the soundtrack for Easy Come, Easy Go, Elvis trusted Red to pick the songs. But beneath the surface, tensions were growing. Red and the rest of the group bristled at the influence of Larry Geller, Elvis's hairstylist who had evolved into something of a spiritual advisor. Red saw Geller as an outsider, even going so far as to corner him in a bumper car at a fairground, shouting threats in a burst of frustration. To Geller, it felt like Red was trying to guard Elvis against him. The rift widened in 1967 when Red discovered he had been excluded from Elvis's wedding ceremony, invited only to the reception afterward. The slight cut so deep that Red chose not to attend at all. Things turned around briefly at the end of the decade. Elvis shook off his stale movie formula and returned with a vengeance through the 1968 Comeback Special, a powerful television event that reignited his reputation as a live performer. He followed it with From Elvis in Memphis, his strongest studio album in years. For a moment, it looked as if the old spark was back. That momentum faded quickly in the 1970s. Endless Las Vegas residencies, an onslaught of live albums, and a growing reliance on prescription drugs chipped away at him. By 1973, Elvis was in serious trouble, admitted to the hospital bloated and struggling to breathe. Red was among the few willing to confront him about his drug use, but Elvis brushed it off, insisting the real problem was his stomach. Red's honesty came at a cost. In July 1976, Vernon Presley called him in, along with Sonny West and Dave Hebler, and told them they were being let go to cut expenses. For Red, it felt like betrayal, but all he could say in the end was that he tried. Struggling financially and emotionally, Red, Sonny, and Hebler turned to journalist Steve Dunleavy to write Elvis. What happened? The tell-all was first serialized in the UK in May 1977, and weeks before Elvis's death, it was published in the United States. It was a bombshell, and many questioned whether it was written out of loyalty, anger, or simple financial need. Red and Elvis spoke one last time on the phone. Elvis sounded disoriented, rambling about his father's health and people trying to prove he was insane. Red took the opportunity to tell him how much it hurt to be dismissed without so much as a word. Elvis, distant and cold, told him that in business, he didn't operate that way. According to Linda Thompson, Elvis's girlfriend, it was Vernon who delivered the bad news because Elvis himself never wanted to play the villain. Looking back years later, Red admitted that the book was written both for money and out of concern for his friend. Despite the bitterness, he always insisted on one truth. He loved Elvis deeply, even if their story ended in heartbreak. The bodyguard who saw Elvis crumble. Pryor's journey is tangled up with the final years of Elvis Presley. Long before that, he trained with legends like Sugar Ray Leonard and Roberto Duran, even crossing paths with Chuck Norris. But when Elvis called, Pryor answered. He and his friend Joe were pulled from teaching self-defense to law enforcement and the FBI in Florida to serve as bodyguards for the king of rock and roll. At first, it sounded like a dream job. What Pryor didn't realize was that he was stepping into a world of chaos, betrayal, and decline. Behind the stage lights, Elvis's life was crumbling. The singer who once looked like the picture of health had grown nearly unrecognizable, ballooning close to 400 pounds in his last 2 years. Food became his comfort. Steaks with mashed potatoes before and after shows. Endless sodas, hours of binging. Pryor watched helplessly as Elvis, weighed down by heartbreak from his divorce and years of manipulation by his manager, Colonel Tom Parker, slowly destroyed himself. Parker, a notorious gambler, had bled Elvis dry. By the mid-1970s, Presley was broke, forced to tour just to survive. Even his beloved plane was repossessed. Pryor remembers Elvis confiding that he was lucky to even keep Graceland. The betrayal hit hard. For a man who was famously generous, realizing his trust had been shattered left him bitter and broken. According to Pryor, Elvis didn't just hire him for protection against fans. He needed a shield from the people closest to him. Prescription pills soon became part of the picture. They weren't street drugs, Pryor insists, but a cocktail of medications for pain, blood pressure, diet, sleep, and energy. They numbed the pain, but they also sped up the unraveling. Elvis, barely in his 40s, carried himself like a man twice his age, angry, weary, and suspicious of everyone. In an exclusive conversation with the U.S. Mirror, Pryor revealed that stepping in to intervene with Elvis's lifestyle simply wasn't an option. According to him, Elvis struggled with food as much as he did with pills, eating constantly and never recognizing when he was full. He explained that Elvis's relationship with food wasn't about joy, it was about filling the emptiness. Misery drove him to overindulge, and overeating soon became an addiction. By this point, Elvis was consuming massive portions: 4 steaks in a sitting, baked potatoes, chocolates, cakes, and almost anything he could get his hands on, except alcohol. His weight climbed close to 400 pounds, and with hotel room service and backstage catering always free, self-control was nearly impossible. Physically, the king was suffering. He was drenched in sweat, uncomfortable being touched, and constantly relying on pills to wake up or fall asleep. High blood pressure, diabetes, and his weight were all slowly killing him. Pryor admitted he feared Elvis might one day eat a heavy meal, take a pill, and never wake up. Even though Ted desperately wanted to help, the role of a bodyguard back then came with strict boundaries. Employees weren't allowed to tell Elvis what to do. He was the king, and questioning him was unthinkable. Pryor later confessed that he wished he had at least urged moderation, but at the time, it wasn't his place. Elvis's health began to affect his legendary stage presence. His breathing became labored under the strain of so much weight, and his iconic voice lost its power. Fans noticed, and the quality of his performances declined. Despite global fame, Elvis never performed outside the United States. According to Pryor, that decision came from his manager, who was preoccupied with his own gambling issues. On tour, Pryor witnessed firsthand the frenzy Elvis inspired, especially among women. Fans would rush the stage, and bodyguards had to use chokeholds and takedown techniques just to keep order. In one shocking moment, a woman even tried to strangle Pryor with an Elvis scarf in a desperate attempt to reach the star. Through it all, Elvis remained generous to his security team, treating them well even if his mood often turned sour. Later in life, however, Pryor noticed a change in Elvis's view of women. The losses of his mother and wife left him bitter, and the warmth he once showed began to fade. Still, after countless shows across Florida, Memphis, California, New York, and dozens of other stops, everything ended with one phone call: Elvis was gone. The news stunned Pryor, just as it stunned the world. Reflecting on his time with the king of rock and roll, he remembered a man who, despite his struggles, always showed kindness to the men who protected him. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe, comment, and turn on post notifications to stay updated with our latest content.